Once upon a time, there were these people called the Hyksos that had invaded an ancient land. Yeah, that's them. They came vandalizing sacred monuments, brutalizing the people, and destroying farmland. Then one day, they sent a disrespectful letter to King Sekenenre Teo II. And the people was like, yeah, it's on. So war ensued. The king died in the battle. Then his mother and his wife, they stepped in to continue the revolution by advising their sons when they got old enough to take up the fight. One of these sons was named Amos I. He defeats the Hyksos, restoring order back into the land. All hail to Amos I. He was the glorious liberator, unifier of Kemet, great conqueror, and final conqueror. He marries this sister behind me. Her name was Amos Nefertari. Sis was so bad. Her husband was one of the first absolute rulers to portray her, his great royal wife, as his equal and awesome figures side by side with his. I remember reading about her, and one of the things that really stood out to me about her, they said that she was really about that life as far as being a royal woman. And she was a priestess too. And one of the things that she said was, before I can be a priestess to anyone, I have to be a priestess to myself. And I thought that was profound, because a lot of times people like titles, but they don't want to do the work to become that. So in previous dynasties, the wife was either depicted as a small doll-like figure or not at all. Nefertari was co-ruler with her husband and highly respected by Kemet's masses, the elite, and was often sought out by foreign dignitaries. From this powerful union would come Thutmose I and Amos. Together they bore 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys. Only one child lived into adulthood. Her name was Makare, later to be named Hatshepsut. This is her story. Hatshepsut means first of noble women, and she was. She came from a long line of revolutionaries. Hatshepsut was a gifted child who was nurtured well by her beloved mother, Amos, and father, Thutmose I. When she was a child, her father started grooming her for leadership. Also, her father had a son by a lesser wife named Mut-Nefert, and his name would be Thutmose II. Thutmose II and Hatshepsut got married and had 2 daughters together, and their names were Neferu-Re and Mary-Tra Hatshepsut. Neferu-Re received special tutelage because Hatshepsut was grooming her for leadership. Now, her husband, Thutmose II, was overweight and a sickly man. Hatshepsut dominated that relationship, and there was no proof that Thutmose II objected to giving her sole power to govern. She had to have demonstrated great leadership to secure that position. This is a sculpture of Hatshepsut. She and her husband ruled together for 12 years. He died at the age of 30, but he had fathered a child with a concubine named Aset, who would become Thutmose III. Before his death, he named Thutmose III as his successor, which made Thutmose III Hatshepsut's stepson. He was too young to rule, so Hatshepsut became co-regent. That means that temporarily she would rule until he was groomed and at an age where he could. But during this time, she set out to position herself as a great leader. Sis began to set up her advisory board, which consisted mostly of Amun priests. These men helped her secure ultimate government control and were led by Senamut. We'll talk about him in just a minute. Hatshepsut had been under the tutelage of some of these same men as a child, and they had much respect for her father. So a way was being paved. It's destiny. 7 years into her co-regency, she changed the game. She took control of the throne. And she stated that the god Amun, by way of her father, blessed her mother with a male child. And she was that male child, dressed in boyish garb. Now you're going to see as the story progresses, there is no way she could have pulled this off without the support of the Amun priesthood. They attributed greatly to her success. They existed, so I have to say their names. So the first man in her life was her father, Thutmose I. He would be pivotal in helping her develop the qualities of royalty. He saw she was gifted as a child, so he nurtured that. She learned to walk gracefully, dignified, and with authority, how to greet others, how to develop and maintain friendships, and how to have conversations. This is Senamut. Remember I said we're going to talk about him later? This is him. This is a sculpture of him holding Hatshepsut's daughter, Neferu-Re. One of his titles was overseer of the royal residence. He was speculated to be Hatshepsut's lover, but that's only speculation because it has never been proven to be a fact. He was a commoner who rose to a position of power. He was Hatshepsut's right-hand man. He boasted about having over 80 titles. I can believe that. This man was what people would refer to as a genius. He was good at just about everything he did. He tutored her daughter. He was in all her project campaigns and for building campaigns and policies. She relied on his advice and support. So sis, you did good. A few more men that was on her advisory board. Anini, His title was Chief of Royal Works. He was an architect that had been in the family since the days of her father. Hatshepsut, he was head of the Amun priesthood. Nahisi, guardian of the royal seal, chief treasurer and chancellor. Pu'umre, inspector of the monuments. Abibni, he was in charge of the Nubian gold mines. Sinman, a high priest of the Amun set. Penekbit was a soldier and treasurer. Thuti, head treasurer, and he was in charge of the royal fortune. Although Hatshepsut had a lot of masculine energy around her, her mother helped her maintain her femininity. Her mother had no love of power and had been a gentle, serene woman. Hatshepsut was depicted as both a lion overcoming the enemy and a woman praying for peace. She embodied both her parents' personalities by being a brilliant, strong leader in one aspect and a woman who loved peace and domestic order in another. This is her support. Gang, gang. I want to say this because I think it's important. Back in ancient times, ancient Africa, like the word king and queens was not words that they used. They used titles. As you notice when I was describing some of these people, they had titles. So they were called by their works. They were called by their works. And so, for instance, Hatshepsut titles were Great Royal Mother, Great Royal Wife, Royal Daughter, Royal Sister, Divine Wife, Lady of the Two Lands, Divine Wife of Amun. She was all of her titles. She fulfilled all of her titles. She lived out all of her titles. So to earn titles, you had to show and prove. And to be a royal woman, this was some of the qualifications. Moral code was the core of your lessons. You had to know science, mathematics, linguistics, liberal arts, the art of speaking, and your family history. This is her great-grandmother, Amus Nefertari. The role models of her bloodline shaped her character and her personality. Even though Hatshepsut was an unqualified pharaoh, sis showed out on the throne. She reopened trade routes that had been disrupted by the Hyksos invasion. She brought great wealth and artistry to the land. During this time, it was such a prosperous time. This was the golden age of Kemet. And because they were just so abundant, she focused on peace, maintaining domestic order, and the arts. So that's why you had a lot of building. We'll get into like some of the things that she built. Her foreign policy, like I said, was based on trade and not war. She expanded trade routes, and the most famous one was the Punt expedition. We'll talk about that next.